Hello, my friends. I hope you're doing well. On this channel, I speak about controversial issues. I started this YouTube channel in 2017 to address the Syrian war. And back then, it was very controversial to show the other side of the story. Anything that I said was interpreted by people according to their intentions or understanding of the Syrian conflict. But on the political level, let's say on the mainstream media level, I've been smeared a lot by them, including by politicians and major media outlets. They tried to smear me, they tried to commit character assassination. And if you search me on Google, you will find a lot of things about me, which when I read about them, I'm mind boggled because this is not me and I know who I am, and I believe in my values, and I believe that I have good intentions, and I would not harm any innocent person, either by words or by deeds or in any other way. I'm 100% sure about myself. Therefore, it's not like I don't care what people say, but it doesn't really impact me what people say. So criticism is something very normal, natural, especially if you put your face in public. Many people do not really probably know that when you put your face in public, you will definitely come under scrutiny. Some people will doubt you, some people will be suspicious, some people will love you, some people will hate you. It's a big spectrum. So I don't really expect people to agree with me on everything. And I have learned this the hard way after 8 years of doing YouTube videos. Now I'm communicating with you, I'm posting videos. Sometimes these videos are watched by 10,000 people, other times 20,000 people. And sometimes if the video hits, then it reaches to 50,000 people. So imagine you're standing in front of 20,000 or 10,000 people and delivering them a certain political message. Of course, out of 10,000 people, probably 10%, probably 20%, probably 50%, I don't know, people would not agree with me. But some people just don't agree and leave the video, and other people basically comment and leave comments. So in the past decade, I've been criticized a lot for, let's say, criticizing the US empire, and I still do. And passionately because I believe in justice and I believe in sovereignty and independence of the countries. And I believe that the people should have the right to choose the path. However, we are not living in a so called rules based international order. We are living under a jungle. And even in a jungle, there are certain rules and regulations. For example, in the jungle, the animals do not eat other animals just for fun or just for the sake of killing, but humans do, and empires do. Therefore, when an empire has an excessive force and might and power, they will definitely act accordingly because this empire represents all the illnesses, the psychopathies, and the sociopathy of the politicians. There are very few people, let's say, join political life without this psychopathic background. And especially in the US, this is like a requirement for people to become in a position of power because it requires to use violence, excessive violence, for the sake of reaching the goals of the empire. Therefore, this is where I come from. Now, when I criticize, for example, Iran, the reason for the criticism is purely political. It's purely to analyze the mistakes of Iran. When I criticize the former Syrian government under Assad, the reason for it was because I didn't believe that the choices they made was correct. And I'm an independent person. I don't belong to media organization. I don't belong to any political entity. I am not a member of any political party or non-political party. I'm only responsible for what I say. And I come always from a good intention ground. I stand on a good intention ground. And when I recently criticized Iran multiple times, the reason for it is because I believe Iran didn't take the right decisions. not only to protect itself, but also to protect its allies. Now, in 2001, when Al-Qaeda supposedly did the 9/11, if you believe in the official narrative, the neocons and the Zionists said clearly that they are going to establish, quote unquote, the new Middle East. And they started by invading Afghanistan. Afghanistan had nothing to do with the attack. It was the supposedly Al-Qaeda. But they came after an entire nation of Afghanistan, and they have destroyed the country, and they have killed many innocent people, and they have created secret prisons for torture. Horrendous things. They have revived the opium trade in Afghanistan. They have filled the pockets of military-industrial complex with trillions of dollars. So I know why the US was positioned in Afghanistan, for the sake of the continuation of the empire and blocking the access of other powers into the Indian Ocean, to revive the opium, to project from Afghanistan to the north on the southern belt of Russia. That's why we oppose this war, because the reason for it was not to combat terrorism, but rather to keep the empire intact, but also to improve the position of the United States on the global scene. So they occupied Afghanistan, and then they moved to Iraq. Now, in Iraq, the Iranian side, they wanted for Saddam to be gone. They had a long conflict with Iraq. From the 1982 to 1988, I believe it was a long war. Hundreds of thousands of people from both sides perished. So Iran didn't really have empathy or sympathy to the regime of Saddam Hussein. But at the same time, they also knew that the presence of the US occupation forces in Iraq is dangerous for them as well, because from Iraq, they could plan and initiate military hostilities against Iran and also against Syria. So in 2003, the Iranians supported the Shias in Iraq, and this has led into a Shia-dominated government in Baghdad. And this has, of course, created certain, let's say, negative sentiments among the Sunnis. They were the rulers for a long time, and they were subjugating the Shias, and now the Shias came to power, and now the Sunnis have these feelings against them. Syria supported different sides back then, and I am sad to say that some of the elements that passed through Syria to Iraq were Takfiri jihadists. This was a fatal mistake to keep the borders sometimes not secured well. Even back then, Nour al-Maliki, the prime minister of Iraq, who was supported by Iran, he accused Syria of not controlling the borders well with Iraq. But from the Syrian side, they also saw that the American presence there will definitely impact the situation in Syria. Therefore, Syria turned a blind eye to the influx of these Takfiris to Iraq. And now they came back from Iraq to Syria, one of which is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who appointed himself as the president of Syria. So you see, when I criticize some of the decisions, I know that back then probably they didn't have much of a choice, but definitely allowing a jihadi scene to thrive in Iraq will definitely have a blowback on Syria, which happened later. So see, when I criticize it because it was not the best choice, or it was a wrong choice. Now, after Iraq, the empire moved to Lebanon. Condoleezza Rice back then said that the war against Lebanon in July 2006 is the birth of the new Middle East. And I remember back then Norman Finkelstein gave an interview on a Lebanese TV basically saying,
the Secretary of State said it was the birth pangs of the new Middle East. That's the statement of a freak. A human freak would compare the birth of a child with the destruction of a country. And yet there are people here who are so anxious to welcome her. They're trying to figure out what are the Americans thinking. They can't wait for their banquets. How can anyone respect that? I respect the Jews 1,000 times more. Never to forgive, never to forget. All the death and all the destruction. And you can't wait to welcome him.
And then they moved from Lebanon to Syria, to Sudan, to Libya, and they were successful. Now, some people come and tell me, no, but the US didn't emerge victorious. Now, if in these countries, now I would argue and say the military victory that is in our mind that the United States achieves a decisive victory, if we see it from that perspective, yes, the US didn't achieve a victory, a decisive one. But what if I tell you that that's probably not the goal? What if I tell you that the goal was to keep these countries unstable, is to keep these countries fragmented, is to keep these countries divided into different spheres of influence? Maybe that was the goal. Maybe the goal was to keep these countries in constant turmoil. Maybe that was the goal. If that was the goal, then that is a victory. Because, look, I always hear this following argument that the US shouldn't repeat its mistakes. They shouldn't repeat the mistakes of Iraq in Syria. They shouldn't repeat the mistakes of Libya in Syria. But if these mistakes are repeated and similar outcomes were materialized, then maybe, just maybe, those are not mistakes. Those are basically well-planned and executed orders in order to create these conditions in these countries. Now, after 2011, so Syria came under huge attack by the empire. The regime change war started. In 2012, Hezbollah intervened in Syria because this was not only a war against Syria, and definitely this was coordinated between Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. And Hezbollah intervened because if Syria falls, then they will be next. And the Iranians knew as well, if Syria falls, then their influence in the region will be degraded, and if not completely destroyed. Therefore, they have sent their advisors to Syria. They have sent even Qasem Soleimani to Syria to fight against ISIS, Nusra, in Deir ez-Zor, in Aleppo, in different places, even in the suburbs of Damascus, because Iran knew that if Syria falls, their presence in the region will be degraded, their influence will be degraded, and their national security will be threatened. It's not like politics is not like friendships. If I see my friend, who is a good friend of mine, and he's attacked by someone in the street, I will join the fight on the side of my friend, regardless if it's beneficial for me or if the outcome of this fight would be positive or negative. That's not even in my calculation. But in politics, in these geopolitical conflicts, countries help each other because they have mutual interests. And Iran did that after 2012 through first Hezbollah, and then they sent their advisors. And Russia did the same in 2015 because it was in their interest to foil the regime change war in Syria. Now, in 2025, I would argue that Syria has gone forever. Syria is no longer, there is no country called Syria. It's just a geography where the Turks, under Erdogan, they are occupying largest swath of territories, and they have an enormous influence over Jolani's regime. In the south, Israel is occupying largest swath of territories. They're bombing villages. They're ordering civilians to evacuate their towns, and Jolani is not even giving them any even light weapons to resist. In the east, the Americans' country is completely disintegrated, and the coastal cities will sooner or later move away from the central government, that's just a matter of time. Now, under such circumstances, we have also another ally of Iran in Lebanon has come under heavy bombardment and leadership decapitation. And if you ask any Lebanese Shia or supporter of Hezbollah, they will all tell you the same thing, that they were disappointed by Iran for not reacting or retaliating in a way that could end the war on Lebanon, especially after the decapitation of the leadership. They expected a different type of retaliation. Those are not my wishful thinkings. I'm delivering to you what the people are telling me. So there is a general disappointment of Iran because of this particular case. Now, many people also expected Operation Promise 3, which didn't also come. So, those are the criticisms directed at Iran. And it's not like you abandoned me, we were best friends, what happened? No, this is not type of a relationship. People are saying these things because they also believe that the blows received in Lebanon, in Gaza, and the loss of Syria will definitely reflect negatively on Iran. So people, when they criticize the choices of Iran and the calculations of Iran, they're also coming from the position of basically telling Iran that, look, if you lose Syria, which it happened, and if Hezbollah is weakened, and if Gaza is decimated, then you will no longer have the arms that you could by yourself influence and challenge the US dominance on the region. So this is why the people are criticizing Iran. Now we are watching lots of hype about a war against Iran. It reminds me of the 2003 hype against Iraq. If you remember back then, Alistair Campbell, who I believe recently also met with Jolani on a podcast interview, he had an article basically saying like Iraq is 45 minutes away from attack, a nuclear attack, WMD attack against the US interests in the region. This is how they manufactured consent for war, an illegal war against Iraq. Now they're doing the same thing against Iran. And I believe that this signal conversation that was supposedly leaked to the press between senior American security officials, it basically presents two options to me. One, the entire US national security apparatus forgot how smartphones work and accidentally gave journalists their war plans. Or two, which I believe that is the case, they wanted this information out to shape the narrative before the bombs fell, not only on Yemen, but also on Iran. This is how you start preparing the public in the US about the possibility of a war, testing the waters in the United States about where the mood lies about such a conflict against Yemen or Iran or both. Now, in this case, the US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, who is an evangelical Zionist fanatic, he says that Israel is the appetizer and America is the entree. Let's take a look what he has to say.
Why is the defense of Israel, the support of Israel, important to America?
Senator, a great question. The truth is, it's been very clear, as expressed by the Iranian government, that Israel is the appetizer and we're the entree. They don't want to stop at Israel. They certainly want to annihilate them. They've said it over and over. And there's an old saying that when people are saying again and again they're going to kill you, you might want to take them seriously. But they've also gone beyond saying they want to annihilate Israel and wipe it off the face of the earth. They've said that their ultimate goal is to first take care of the little Satan, they identify as Israel, and then come after the great Satan. Senator, that's us. And whatever is happening to Israel, it is the canary in the coal mine. These governments, Iran being the most notable, who want to develop a nuclear weapon and who have the audacity to wish to use it to destroy a sovereign Jewish state, so that they ultimately could destroy Western civilization. That's why it matters, Senator, and I appreciate your question because I hope people will understand this is not just about Israel. It is about us. And if we don't stand with them, they stand alone. And if they fall alone, we fall next.
So, as you see, the opinion in Washington, D.C., that Iran is not only coming after Israel, but it is coming after the United States. I will argue the following. I believe that Iran definitely poses an existential threat against Israel. However, I also believe that if such an attack happens against Israel, Israel and the US will retaliate against Iran. And this is why Iran will never attack first. I don't believe that Iran will attack the US interests or Israel first in a way that could present or pose an existential threat to any of them. But I also believe that if for an argument's sake, Iran emerges victorious in a direct confrontation with Israel, this will definitely, 100%, there is no doubt about that, this will end the US hegemony over the region. There is no other country in the region would dare to participate on the side of the US against Iran other than Israel. Is because Israel is part of the US. This is what I'm always trying to explain to my friends and to you guys. Israel and the US are not separate entities. Israel is part of the US empire, and therefore the US intervenes directly in support of Israel. And now they're trying to create a different condition in Gaza. I'm not sure if you're following what's happening in Gaza, but when you watch these demonstrations against Hamas in northern Gaza and in other places, I believe these demonstrations and protests are well planned by probably intelligence assets in Gaza, and they are capitalizing and, of course, people's anger. And as I mentioned in a previous video, in the past 1.5 years, the Palestinians lived the most inhumane conditions that you could ever imagine. I'm sure that none of us can handle that. And when the ceasefire came, they celebrated. But this was the catch. This is the trap that I warned, that you give the people this false hope that if the hostages deal proceed, then there will be a ceasefire and peace. No, the Israelis only gave the Palestinians a temporary ceasefire only to come again after stage 1 or releasing some of the hostages in order to tell the Palestinians this war is not going to be over even if Hamas releases all the hostages, because Hamas cannot stay there. So they made the equation that this problem is due to Hamas, and as long as Hamas exists, there is going to be war. And that's how they have provoked and encouraged and probably planned through intelligence assets these demonstrations against Hamas. And this is going to be used by the mainstream press, by the US administration, by the Israeli officials to tell to the world, look, even the Palestinians are against Hamas, so they don't want to live there. And if Hamas doesn't leave, so you have two choices. Either Hamas leaves the Gaza Strip or the Palestinians want to leave and evacuate Gaza. You see where is this heading to? It plays in the hands of the Israelis, and it plays against the interests of Iran. So in every step Israel takes and the US takes, they're coming closer and closer and closer and closer to Iran. Since 2001, the last destination for a war was Iran. Everybody knows that. And that is why when I criticize Iran for its inaction or not doing enough to protect its own national security, when the assassinations started in Lebanon and when the regime change happened in Syria, because I believe that Iran will be targeted. Now, you could argue and say, yeah, maybe some people are hot-headed and say, yeah, if it's a war, let's go, let's do this and that. I'm not here to make hypes. And if you're looking for sensational content, there's so many other channels are doing it. Israel has collapsed, US empire is over, everything is great. But if you're looking for analysis, I'm trying to give you my own analysis in this case, right? And I believe Iran is in a very, very difficult situation now, and it is faced with two options. And this is an analysis posted by a friend, Firas, that Firas is a great geopolitical analyst, and I watched a podcast of him the other day, which was brilliant. And I was checking his profile today and I found him posting about this situation. And he says, the Iranians face an impossible choice: accept that they have lost the ability to be a regional power that defies the US and instead agree to a deal with the US or risk a war. Consistently, when it matters the most, that is, when the viability and value of Hezbollah were at stake, Iran refused to fight. However, due to Iran's internal dynamics, we are uncertain if Iran can transform to a nationalist state as opposed to a pan-Islamist one without a war. And make no mistake, a deal with the US with Hezbollah defeated and Syria lost would imply exactly this kind of transformation. It would be an admission that Khomeini and Khamenei failed. Now, here you could argue that Hezbollah has not been defeated, and I don't think that Hezbollah has been defeated, because the defeat also means the end of its ability to pose any security threat against Israel and to be disarmed and to be disbanded, etc. Hezbollah still has enormous military might, but from my understanding and from my discussions and from my contacts in Lebanon, they're all telling me Hezbollah is not interested to go to war now against Israel if Iran asks for Hezbollah to participate, because when they needed Iran the most, Iran didn't participate, and they believe that the preservation of their community in Lebanon comes first. I'm talking about the Lebanese Shia. So they also feel there is an existential threat against them from the south, the Israelis, and from the east. These Nusra and HTS terrorists are trying also to attack Lebanon. So their priority is now self-preservance. Iranian military leaders know that a war with the US, even one in which the regime survives, would completely wreck their economy. The Iranians may believe that they can defend their missile launch sites or their nuclear sites, and that they can impose a high cost on the US by targeting its regional bases and shipping with their ballistic missiles. However, they also know that would do them little good if their oil, power, and industry are destroyed, which they now is very much within America's capabilities. The problem, however, is that making a deal with the US should render the Islamic Revolution pointless. Why is there a revolutionary regime if it makes peace with the US and accepts that it cannot threaten Israel? How does the leadership accept such a deal and survive against popular reformists? Again, it is the internal dynamics of Iran that pose the greatest risk of war, because they impose on Iran an extreme level of intransigence. With the currency collapsing more rapidly than ever, we will see if this changes. This is the opinion. You agree, you disagree. I already disagreed with the part of Hezbollah. However, I also agree that Iran is in front of two choices now. Either agree on a deal with the US, which doesn't only include the nuclear program, but also its ballistic capabilities and influence in the region, and this is what Trump is demanding from Iran, or go to war against the US. And I think both choices are bitter for Iran. But what do you think? Do you think that Iran will choose de-escalation, or do you think Iran will choose confrontation? If you ask me, I believe if the United States doesn't attack Iran will choose the escalation, will choose a deal. But if the United States attacks Iran, then Iran will definitely retaliate. And there is going to be a huge economic crash in the region, and this will be felt also in Europe. The United States is probably have some self-sufficiency in its oil. Of course, its exports will be affected, but on an existential level, Iran needs to sell its oil in order to survive, right? And Iran is selling most of its oil and fuel to China. So if the prices skyrocket, we don't know how this situation is going to be handled. I'm not an expert on economics. So if you know more about it, please fill in the comments below so we can learn from you. But if the United States doesn't attack Iran, this could be also seen as a weakness from the US side, and Iran would be emboldened. So it's really interesting situation, very dangerous situation that we have to follow and see where is this going to lead. I've been reading some comments today about that the Iranians should accept the deal, others say no. I'm trying to host both Scott Ritter and Said Mohammad Marandi on my channel for a civilized discussion about this, because they have been disagreeing on X recently about this case. But one thing, just to wrap up this, I'm not giving this analysis to upset anyone. I sometimes have to tell you the bitter truth, and sometimes it is unpleasant to hear these thoughts, because we all have our biases and we all have our, let's say, wishful thinking, Like if I want to speak about my wishful thinking is Syria would be independent, it would be pan-Arabist, it would be integrating its economy with Iraq, with Palestine, with Lebanon, with Jordan, create a regional alliance, create a federal system between these countries, integrate their economies. That would be my dream, an independent region. But the reality is, the region is more fragmented as it was in the last probably 100 years. And this will definitely reflect on the geopolitics of the region. And the US and Israel and other Western countries will use this fragmentation, and they have created this fragmentation in the region. Now they're trying to even divide Syria more, like into mini states. Whether or not a war is going to happen against Iran, I would say, God forbidden that a war happens against Iran, for the sake of Iran, for the sake of the Iranian people, and for the sake of the people in the region. But if it happens, God forbid, again, this is going to be disastrous for Iran, for Israel, for the US, and this could include nuclear exchange. So where is going to be the position of Russia and China? That's very good. Like, we need to ask ourselves that question. Will any of these sides intervene? I doubt, but time will tell. I've been your host, Kevork Almassian of Syriana Analysis. I hope you liked this video and this analysis, and I hope I didn't upset you and didn't provoke you. That's not my intention here. If you like what I do, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and also subscribe. We are, I think, 3,400 subscriptions away from hitting the 100K goal. And if you like to do more to support independent journalism and independent analysis that I'm here doing, I am affiliated with no one. There are different means in the description below to support this work. And I will see you again tomorrow on the 27th of March 2025. Thank you very much for watching this. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.